teaching kids about beer in a respectful way when they're young is really good, so then they don't end up like in college drinking lots of really crappy beer. Not that either of us know anything about that.
No, I would never.
Never had anything called trash can punch.
No. Jungle juice, never.
Jungle juice,
yeah.
no. We had nothing like that at our college. We've come a long way.
So usually you're shooting for somewhere between like 148 and 158 is sort of typical mash temperatures. The higher the mash temperature, the more sort of body is left in the beer, and the lower the mash temperature, the drier it usually ferments. So we're shooting for about 150. We're looking for the lower end of that range because we're going for sort of a drinkable tart, but not like a stout or something on the high end.
Right.
Like the milk stout I'd have to look at my notes, but I bet that was more like 154, 156, something along those lines. Of course, being a hack, anywhere in the 148 to 153 range, I'd be pretty happy here, I think. So, and I'm just trying to stir it up. See, sometimes you get stuff that clumps. Try to get that ball. Ooh.
You don't want clumping.
Well, if it's clumped, it can't be. There's dry parts in the middle, and you want all the water to hit all the grains so that it turns everything to sugar.
Because yeast eats sugar.
Then you let it sit for an hour at that temperature. Some folks, I guess I should back up a bit. That's sort of the quick and dirty method is one batch of water, one set of grains, and one temperature. Lots of folks have different steps. So they'll start at one temperature and bring it up to another temperature. Sometimes there's 2, 3. There's a million different ways to do that. This is sort of the most direct, simple, straightforward way. So you let it sit for an hour, and then we heat up some sparge water, which just is essentially you drain your cooler, get all the wort out. We're gonna just start draining it, and there's a pretty simple valve right here, and hopefully I didn't knock our little screen off, and it will keep the grains in there, and then the liquids will come out. One sort of extra step that folks normally do is called a Vorloff, which is they drain a little bit into a pail or a bucket or a can and then put it back just until some of the sort of the little chunks and bits, and once it starts running clear, then they start putting it. I've heard mixed reviews whether it actually does anything, but the idea is it sort of keeps some of the bigger pieces out of your beer so that you get clearer beer at the end. I don't know if it works or not, but it's a pretty easy step, so I usually just do that. You will notice it starts, see there's chunks, and it's kind of cloudy, but eventually it starts running a little clearer. So at a point where it gets sort of to where I like it, I guess, and I guess there's no real rule. It's just once it starts coming through a little clearer, I'm going to put this back in, and I'll move the hose over to my carboy and start draining straight into there. So this is pretty clear. I've got about a gallon that's run through, so I'm going to move it over to the carboy. We're just going to drain it off. You will notice it starts, see there's chunks, and it's kind of cloudy, but eventually it starts running a little clearer. You take hotter water. It's usually a little bit hotter than the mash water, so it sort of it loosens everything up, gets all the sugars out. A little bit hotter, everything runs a little bit better. So a little bit hotter water, you refill your cooler, stir it up again, let it sit for a couple minutes, and then you drain that off. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Some guys do a fly sparge. What I'm doing is a batch sparge. So in a fly sparge, You would typically have another cooler higher on this, and they like gravity feed it. But you'd keep like a steady level of water in the cooler, in the mash tun, and then you'd slowly trickle sparge water in, essentially keeping that level all the way through. It's kind of tricky to do, and it takes like an hour, and it's a little more involved. This is called a batch sparge. So you do your mash, you drain it off, you sparge in. Sometimes guys do 2 batches. I just do one, essentially. So you could add half of that, stir it up, let it drain, add the other half, stir it up, let it drain. I just do it in one big batch. It's sort of quick. I don't get as much sugar out of the same pounds of grain as someone who does a fly sparge. It's more work, but you get more sugar out with the same amount of grain. More alcohol, more gravity to start with. I just tend to have to adjust my recipes a little bit and add another half pound or pound of grain, knowing that my efficiency is not going to be great. And then you've got wort ready to be, normally would be boiled. Normally you would then boil that for 60 minutes, add your hops, whatever other additions that you're going to do, some spices if that's the route that you're heading. But today we are going to try a shortcut souring method, which I've never done. Didn't really know it existed until about a week ago when I found it on Google. But the idea is to take a bacteria which produces lactic acid, which makes the beer sour. So once we're done, we collect our wort. We're going to put it in a carboy, add the bacteria, keep it in a warm environment, which again, I didn't know people did this, but we're going to reuse our cooler and put some water in and an aquarium heater and try to keep our wort at about 100 degrees, which should speed up that souring process. And we're going to do that. I'm going to keep tasting it until we get something that tastes kind of like what we're shooting for. Then at that point, we'll put the wort back into a kettle, boil, sort of the normal procedure, boil for an hour, add some hops, seawater. Yep, and the seawater would come in at that point. And any hops we're going to use, but it's going to be very low on the IBUs. Very, very few hops, like half an ounce real late of a low alpha acid hop, because that's kind of what the style's going for. Though you're telling me that maybe we're going to dry hop this later, so wet hop this later, so we'll see. We'll talk about that. And so that's pretty much it. And then you boil, you cool the wort, you put it in a carboy, then we'll add the regular yeast, and we're just going with a pretty straightforward, neutral. I think it was US-05, which is kind of a 1056 US-05 or kind of go-to what you'd use in like an IPA or a pale ale. Not much yeast flavor, not much maltiness, just kind of neutral. We're shooting for something with a starting gravity of about 1050. So it should go fairly quick. That's sort of a smallish to medium beer, about 5% or so maybe. So 2-3 weeks, I'd say. And then at that point you can bottle or put it in kegs, and whichever way you're going to go to get some carbonation. So if you're bottling it, you would add another dose of sugar right before you bottle, so that then whatever yeast are left would eat that sugar, produce some more carbon dioxide, but now it's trapped in the bottle versus being vented in your carboy. And that takes a couple weeks, again, depending on the temperature. A lot of folks are into that now. Allagash does a lot of that, where they bottle condition. It's sort of seen as the more natural way. The quicker method is to put it in a keg and force carbonate it with CO2, which can take a couple days or up to a week. But it's quicker. Some folks don't like it because it's a little more artificial, I guess. It's not as natural. You're taking sort of a bottled product and putting it in. I personally can't taste much difference in the flavor, and I tend to go that route now just because it's quicker, it's easier, it's more controllable, I guess. If you bottle condition and say you don't stir in the sugar great, you might get some bottles that are over carbonated and some that are under. It's just a little tougher to control everything. I think you could probably push this one up to as quick as 2 weeks. I tend to find even beers that are ready quicker, they taste a little bit better if you give them just a little bit of age. So, say 3 weeks to a month.
So we have wrapped up our home brew. We are at some stage in that. We are now waiting for it to finish its process. We have done all we can do in a week's worth of time. And now we're going to move on to our third round. Jane, you want to take that?
Sure. So we like to talk to people about their first beer memory. And not, well, it could be your favorite beer memory, but try to think back as well as you can to that standout beer moment.
Yeah. You know, I should have thought about this beforehand, knowing that you were going to ask these same questions. I've listened to the show. I should have thought. I don't know. My early beer memories are around college and stuff, and that's not really what I think we're shooting for here. I don't know. I think later in life, some of discovering some of these craft beers, I think, is probably where I'd go with that question. I don't really count Bud Light or Bud Diesel Pounders.
Why would you?
College dorms is a beer memory, I guess. I think later in life, just sort of discovering some of this. And I always liked sort of good beers, Sam Adams and that stuff, but I didn't really get onto these craft beers until maybe a couple of years ago. And then just sort of trying to seek out and find some of this stuff. Learning about Hetty Topper or Bissell Brothers or some of this stuff, and then kind of trying to find it and taste it and collect it a little bit. I think that's been pretty cool. I guess that's not really first beer memory, but more recent
Beer adventure.
best memory. Yeah, beer adventure. Yeah.
Can I tell you a collaboration of memories that I have?
Does it involve me at college?
It does, but only
Okay.
in the sense that we, for a while, lived in different dorm buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when your wife first started falling for you, and we had to make the trip across what was it called? That open space.
That's a good question.
I can't remember. It's like this big open, there was a walkway down the middle of it.
Yeah, and there was a term for that,
there
and I
was.
can't remember.
I'm glad that I'm not alone in this.
Yeah.
But I remember having glass books, quotes around that, in our backpack and walking across and making that trip a couple times as I got to know you and she got to know you. And it was, for me, when I think back to getting to know you, that's really the first kind of memory that I have, is that noise of walking across that field with a path in it, whatever the term we called it was, to your side of things to kind of go and hang out with you.
I do remember the first time Casey and I were hanging out. I believe I was drinking Wachusett Country Ale, believe it or not.
Wow.
That was sort of a step up, I think, from most of my college drinking experience.
And you're from Massachusetts, right?
I am originally from Massachusetts, from Central Mass, and that's
I skied there when I was little.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly which town that's brewed in, but it's just distributed sort of in the Worcester area. So, and it still is really pretty decent beer. But
And your dad has a store there, right? Is
Yeah,
that where you would
he-
have gotten the Wachusett?
yeah, yep, he managed part owner of a handful of package stores. The package stores in
Packies.
Massachusetts. Yeah, Packies.
I grew up
Yep.
in Massachusetts, yeah.
Yeah, so that I'm sure I bummed beer from him, and I worked in those stores sort of growing up in college, and I don't remember with the timing of that. I think it was in the fall sometime, so it wasn't around. But lots of times during the breaks, I would work at the store, bring back some beer,
But yeah. So it's not actually drinking, it's that noise.